Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. We're sitting at my house recording on this little new finagled studio I got that I'm still trying to figure out.
Studio that looks to me like an alarm clock.
Yeah, it kind of looks like an alarm clock.
So a studio that looks like
an alarm clock. Yeah. But anyway, we were talking about Chau. It's
or
Chau or Chau, right?
Yep.
That's how you spell it. And his little missionary adventure that didn't end well for him.
He's been in the news. Maybe you've seen it, but he was shot and killed with arrows on North Sentinel Island off the coast of India. Been a lot of public, big news organization coverage, a lot of critique.
Yeah.
And,
which may all just be because people are just so tired of talking about Donald Trump.
They just want something else.
To
talk about. Right. So, but it's also it's sad. It's that's never just like cool, great. But it brings up a lot of meaningful questions.
Yeah. So. I think we had a good conversation about it.
Yeah, thanks for talking. I'm Andy Littleton from Mission Church. That's Eric Deepen from the Village, and enjoy it. Let us know what you think.
There you go. We're good to go.
Good morning, Eric.
Good morning. Welcome to my house.
Yeah, we're at your house. Thanks for. It's truly faith over breakfast for me because you just made me breakfast.
I did. I tried to imitate as much as I could of what I had in the refrigerator, your normal breakfast that you used to get it.
Oh, yeah.
Exo, except I didn't remember all the things that they put on there.
Well, it was super thoughtful, and this is great.
No, good.
If they served this somewhere, I'd order it.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, for real.
Well, I charged just $3. Now, here's the thing about the coffee. I realized that I didn't have any... All we had was heavy cream and almond milk, so that is a combination of heavy cream and almond milk. A latte of sorts.
I'm happy with it.
Awesome.
That's great.
Good.
Yeah, I just came from Home Depot. I was grabbing some stuff we're doing an event at the church this weekend, and so our last two rooms of the building have been underway, and we're trying to have them done before the event so we can use them and so that people can see the building open and done. Because the event is a thank you dinner for everybody.
Oh,
and it's going to be like
and helped out and did all those kinds of things.
Yeah, but it's also going to be the first of a yearly tradition, like celebration, remembering what God did and continues to do, but by remembering that there's this kind of impossible building to buy and we were able to get it. And so we thought it'd be a nice touch to have the other two rooms done. So I was grabbing some stuff because I'm getting some people started on it after this. And in the mix of that, I realized I'm not going to have time to get any food. It's not going to happen. So thanks for making me food.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, so you sent me a text last night. Did you say his last name Chau? Is that how you would say it? Or Chau?
I hope so. Chau. Yeah.
John, though. We can pronounce his first name.
We pronounce his first name.
So he is a young guy who just died.
Right.
Because he decided to go be a missionary to this tribe that hasn't had any contact, I thought, until I think the early 1900s, a British officer kidnapped two of them.
Yeah, and so so I've been reading up on this situation a lot lately.
So you're probably a little bit more informed than I am.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is a while back, I actually had kind of, for whatever reason, I think it was something to do with the sermon, I had looked up what is the most, unreached, is there any truly unreached people we think at this point, or where there's no way?
Right.
And this is the group that pops up that... So there's this island off, the Andamans. It's a group of islands, but it's in India proper. And the Indian government has declared it's protected. You're not allowed to go there. And the tribe is hostile. And so there hasn't, the last contact was actually okay. There was an anthropologist was able to give some coconuts and was given what he believed to be obscene gestures in return, but they didn't kill him. They took the coconuts, and he studied them, and he's spoken on the issue. So he's the last one to make contact. Before that, some British officer, who was probably a pretty sketchy dude, kidnapped some kids, mistreated them, took them back. And so there's some people believe that the hostility may have begun then, that these outsiders are bad.
And they kind of got cut off and isolated at that point too. It seemed like they were trading a little bit with.
And after that, they they made a decision as a community, no more. But that's all guesswork because we don't know.
Right.
Nobody knows their language. We don't know what it is. They're called the Sentinelese, but that's just our name for them. We don't know a thing about them.
Right.
And so, yeah. Anyway, this Asian American young guy who's kind of he had a prolific Instagram account and was a kind of an outdoorsy. If you just looked at his Instagram, which I did,
he was a classic millennial.
He's traveling. He got a sponsorship from a jerky company to go places. Perky jerky.
Yeah. Maybe they'll sponsor us. We could get some jerky.
That'd be rad.
Yeah,
we could just eat jerky and chew on it every Faith Ever breakfast.
Right.
But he had this. There was this other side of him. He went to Oral Roberts University. He did a little summer Institute of Linguistics training. He joined a missions agency.
Did a 3-week in the middle of, I don't know, was it Iowa or somewhere where he had to get dropped in the middle of nowhere and
survival training.
Mm-hmm. Passed with flying colors. The article I read said.
Yeah, I mean, this guy he's survived snake bites, and he's been outdoors a lot. So, but basically, what we're hearing is that from age 18, he heard about this tribe. So for quite some time, and he wanted to. He felt God had really put it on his heart, and finally decided to try to go and establish. I mean, his hope was just to give some gifts and get on the island and see if they'd accept him. Seemed like he was eyes wide open that they might not. Didn't seem like he was utterly delusional. I mean, there are people out there saying that. But I actually read all his journal entries, because we have all those. The Washington Post published them. And, yeah, they're a little scrawled and scribbled, but frankly, he wrote some of them from his kayak.
Right.
So it's not like, this is a madman.
Right.
This is a man in a kayak who believes in God and is afraid of dying, but also believes he should try to reach these folks. And his first contact, they accept his gifts, and a little boy shoots him. It hits his Bible, not him. And so he kayaks away, and then he comes back and he reports some stuff about the island. In his journals, he interacted with some people. And then the last, he went back one more time. Some fishermen were helping him get out there. They've been arrested now. But the last time he went out there, the fishermen reported they saw the body that looked like his being dragged across the beach, and from what we understand, it's still there. And the last time they killed some folks like this, they ended up, once they knew they were fully dead, they put them on stakes and stuck the stakes in the ground to alert anyone who might be looking from the outside world that
they're going to kill you.
This is what's going to happen. And so, there are tons of comments and articles about how either this guy was an idiot or he must have a mental disability. That's the only explanation. It's all the same stuff where people are like, he's mentally ill. Or people are like, what an idiot. This is what religion does to people. What a moron. Good thing he died. I mean, there's some harsh stuff out there. And then there's... this is typical colonial imperialism. and then, some people, from the secular point of view, who are going like, this is sad, but this is just, Christians actually believe this stuff, people, and let's not be too mad at them. But then again, this is not wise.
Right.
And then from the Christian world, there's all over the map. You've got one guy who's just like, I believe he cared, but this was stupid.
Right. It sounded like his family was sort of uncomfortable. Different people that are around him were uncomfortable with him doing it and weren't convinced that it was.
Right. And then you got a lot of I've never heard of his missions organization, frankly. But some people from the other ones were like, yeah, you should really try harder to obey the laws of the land and to be more strategic and more connected. He didn't go as part of the missions organization. He was in one, but they didn't send him.
Right.
He didn't have people praying for him and supporting him. It was, he kind of just did it on his own.
Right.
And then you've got all the way to people who are like, this is a martyr. This is Jim Elliot. This is Jim Elliot, Nate Saint, Roger Youderian. This is just like the guys who died trying to reach the Aka Indians, who Elizabeth wrote about in Through Gates of Splendor, Elizabeth Elliot, which I tried to look back and see if the world backlashed on that mission in the same way.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. But some people are comparing it to that and saying it's the same. So, I want to talk about it.
Yeah, that's what you want to talk about. It's a lot to digest for me. I'll tell you the thing that unfortunately probably kind of jumped out at me, and you're going to laugh about it, was a number that was in the article I read. Of
course.
But it said something about how I think it was in the late 90s, we had about, I don't know, I think it was somewhere in the, I think it was 57,000 missionaries from different organizations, or maybe it was up in the 70s. But the number that surprised me, but now in the early 2000s, we have about 130,000 missionaries.
Wow.
And it's really major, big jump. And they were talking about how this is because a lot of more independent churches sending their own missionaries, a lot more independent missionary organizations sending missionaries, and also the millennials. Sort of the fundamentalist millennials are much more adventure-oriented and much more extreme in sort of their way of thinking once they grab onto something that they think is important, especially if it has some element of risk and danger to it.
See, I would have thought, if you had asked me before this news came out, and before I'd kind of started thinking about it
before
again.
You became well versed in all of it.
Apparently. Because there were years where I felt like missions and unreached people groups in the Christian circles were being talked about a lot.
Yes. And
I'm not hearing as much about that anymore.
No.
Wow. I bet the microphone picked that up.
Oh, yeah. I think it did.
But I just haven't heard as much about it, so I kind of think I would have assumed maybe the numbers had dropped.
Yeah, that would have been my guess, because with the big, push of America being, in the top whatever, as unreached people groups themselves, or not unreached people groups, but people who are...
Church planting has been talked about in the States a lot more than...
Yeah, we hear a lot of the most unchurched city, those kinds of things. Every city in the U.S. is the most unchurched city.
It is. If it's your city, there's some article out about how this is the most unchurched. We're on the top 10.
Oh, yeah.
I remember when Tucson came out as one of the top 10 most unchurched cities. I was like, is that right? Really? Of all the cities in America, we're in the top 10?
Yeah.
There's a church right over there. There's one over there. But, I don't know. But yeah, I wouldn't have thought that it had gone up that.
Yeah, no,
of course you noticed that.
Yeah, of course I noticed that fact. So what do you think about this? I mean, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm mixed. I don't have this perfect landing on it. I mean, it's interesting to see the general culture's reaction to the missionary mindset, and it doesn't surprise me at all that the general culture would go, stop it, just stop. Nobody wants to hear this,
right?
And but the level of backlash is deserved to die. I mean, I think I saw that really fast a lot of time. Like, people were just so easily making that statement. I think
I even saw that when on posts on Facebook about President Bush when he passed away.
I did too. I mean, I thought, I saw one Instagram post which was a middle finger, good riddance, at a picture of him.
Yeah.
I thought, wow.
Yeah.
So we're tolerant? Wow.
No, we're not.
We're not. It's kind of,
well,
dark.
I think part of it is, like, you and I grew up when American history sort of started, it changed in the way it was being taught.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were all taught that, the white man and religion came and basically took advantage of people, killed people,
sure,
and used religion to kind of subjugate people and
right,
bring them under some kind of control.
Yeah, and I think that's the narrative. The fact is, though, that none of us have any clue what a world that hadn't been shaped by Christianity would be like, and what cultures that were once, you could call them savage, like the Irish,
right?
What they would have been like, and what our people groups would have been like if it weren't for Christianity, and somebody entering into a hostile society like
the Irish.
Anglo-Saxons.
The Anglo-Saxons, yes.
Once.
The Germanic barbarians.
And so it's very easy to look and go, colonialism, until you realize you wouldn't express your freedom. You would never put a middle finger post up at George W. Bush if it hadn't have been for Christianity.
Yeah, I always think that that's the funny part of all of this. That we can be so vile because of Christianity.
Yeah. Christianity paved the way for you to freely express yourself, and and for there to be enough grace for you to not be killed for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is interesting. Yeah. So that is striking, and I understand that people don't see that. And I'm kind of waiting for the more thoughtful articles to come out. I think there's been a lot of spew that's occurred. There's been some thoughtful articles, but I'm assuming some folks will really reflect it at the right time.
So how do you understand missions as a pastor of a small church in Tucson that's whole name is Mission?
Yeah.
And you guys have an outward and inward pastor. You guys are like kind of one of those cool, funky churches who like to rename everything in a different way.
I thought that was you guys.
Well, you guys
Pilgrim groups.
Yeah, but you guys have some weird names for your pastors.
That's not really the name. It's just an attempt to explain
exactly
the difference. But yeah, no, actually, I sent the first article I sent to Nick because it was from the Gospel Coalition about reflections on this guy, and the question was would your church have sent him? And so, the thing was, like, he didn't seem tightly connected to any specific body of believers. Was his strategy approved? Did some people, did thoughtful, mature people listen to, think through, plan this with him? No, it was just him. The comparisons to Jim Elliot start to break down because Jim Elliot learned, he and these guys were able to communicate back and forth with the Aka because they had learned Jim Elliot had learned a number of languages,
right?
One local, in order to connect him to somebody who could speak the language of one of the Aka, and so there had been actual communication. And what happened with them was a sad misunderstanding. Somebody had complained and blamed it on the white men, they had actually had all good interactions.
Right.
And then, and so the, and Jim Elliot and friends had a agency that had worked with them and their strategy for years. So there's some real differences. And so I sent that over to Nick and said, hey, we should think about this because we've got some, young, zealous folks around and, wanting to do some kind of missions trips. And I think it was a sobering thought to think like, if you're just kind of going like, hey, sure, anybody go do what you think you should do, and you could have some major regrets and realize you hadn't exercised the mind and the wisdom God's given you. So I think it's cautionary in that regard. But then I do genuinely, I don't think the guy's insane. From reading his articles, like, I mean, it crossed my mind. I went, I'll be ready to hear a critique of this guy when I meet somebody else who's willing to die for what they believe.
Right.
Like when one of the articles is written by somebody who's actually put their life on the line for secularism, okay, I'll read that article.
Right.
I mean, he didn't go there to try to colonialize. He just wanted to know them. And he wanted to know them and to seek ways to tell them about Christ. And you may think that's a stupid idea, but he knew that they might kill him, but he said somebody has to try. And so the amount of willingness to lay down his life, I think we all could be humbled by the fact that I don't all the other millennials who are yapping at him and yelling and calling him a moron. What would you die for? You want the world to die for you.
Right. No, I would totally agree with you. And I mean, the thing is social media, and he had a huge social media account, makes this a very public thing. But
it does.
You think about this 75 years ago, if he did this.
Right.
A few people in a church that knew him and some,
right.
Government official who had to deal with the mess. Yeah. They're the only people who know about this.
Right.
And then somebody writes a book about him 30 years later. That's how.
Right. That's like Jim Elliot.
Yeah. Nobody's writing instant comments on your choices. I mean.
There's time for people to reflect and hear the whole story. As for with him, I mean, so his journal entries are scanned and posted by the Washington Post, so everybody can interpret them however they want within.
So how did the
hours.
Washington Post get access? Did his family give him access?
They must have. I mean, I don't know. I'm assuming that he must have left his journal in the kayak or something. I don't know. Because it seemed like he would kayak in and he would sometimes he'd be sitting in the bay and he'd write. And then he would, go into the island, attempt to interact with somebody, he'd see somebody. And so I'm guessing he didn't carry everything with him every time. How would you? So that must be how it was. Or because the fishermen were taking it, maybe this time he left the stuff with them. But yeah, they were released. And so you can read everything. At the end, he would talk about being afraid. He talked about when the young, he said probably about 10-year-old kid shot him. He kind of yelled. He was like, hey, and he said, I got angry. Like, why did you do that? I'm just standing here. And then he kind of realized, kind of like, okay, hold on, he kind of ran away and reflected on that.
Interesting.
And then he kind of worked through, why did this happen? Why is this young kid, why are these people so scared? What's happened to them?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, he went in with what was it, basically black underwear on, and that was it. He didn't have any. If it were me, I don't care. I would go in with a Kevlar vest.
It's funny because I thought about that too, and then talk about colonialism. But I was like, some Batman, because we watched Batman last week, and his suit, and I was like, if you walk down there and all the arrows are just bouncing off you, they're all going, okay, never mind. But then that's there now. We're
going colonial.
We're going.
But I mean, hey, I don't want to. Honestly, that was the one thing where I'm like, I really admire him, but no clothes. Yeah.
Well, but I think he thought about like, what would they? I mean, they're wearing a small loincloth, so he was like, I'm going to approach them.
No, I totally get it. Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I think that's the problem that I have with it is when you were talking about he wasn't connected into anybody.
Right.
So there's no strategy to A, protect him, but B, to just figure out a more effective way to engage with these people.
Yeah, because when you look back at the Jim Elliot thing, they would circle the village because it was also hostile with this airplane, and they would drop little gifts, right? And they would, on a loudspeaker, say kind words in their language.
Right.
And then they started to receive gifts back. And when they started to receive gifts back, they thought, okay, now this might be a good time, right? And there's people involved in this discussion. It's not just them.
Right.
And that actually, it turned out later when they got to know the villagers that indeed was a good gesture, and they wanted to meet them, and that was all right. They were right about that. And I think if John here had been talking with an agency, they might have slowed him down a lot. Now, I there was one critique that came out from a non-Christian angle that said, people were like, oh, he disobeyed the laws. And somebody kind of said, look, we're all for disobeying laws when they're wrong.
Right.
And so it's easy to go like, oh, he disobeyed the rules, therefore. But the Indian government also doesn't aid these people in any way, shape, or form. Someday, they were talking about, I mean, he had tried to quarantine himself, and, there's diseases that could spread to them, and people are like, oh, you idiot, But it's like, someday a disease is going to get over there through some bird or something.
And wipe them out.
And just wipe them out. So it's like, so don't act like, the Indian government is doing everything they can
to protect them.
They're
Or they
not.
probably don't even care.
It's just easier to just
leave them isolated.
Yeah.
Well, it's a mess because you'd have to go in there with. I mean, if you're the government, you have to go in there with military,
right?
Because you're going to have to subdue them,
right?
And
the fact that they're isolated on an island and they're not coming in and bothering you, it's just like they're over there. They're not bugging us.
Right.
We could just keep our hands out of it.
Doesn't seem like you need the resources from that island.
Right.
Because they'd be wiped out very quickly if you did it.
Right. They would. They would. If there was some resource.
No.
And so, some secular guy kind of said, look, that the Indian government isn't doing the right thing here either. So the fact that somebody tried to make contact from outside is kind of shame on them because they should have figured this out. They should have put thought into this a while ago.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of leads to the question more of what is your thought on missions as a church?
Yeah.
And how do you guys approach missions and think things through? And what does modern day missionary work look like?
Yeah.
How does a small church like yours and mine operate in that?
Yeah, I mean, we have missionaries, and and I would say, and not to a tribe this remote or hostile, but some of them are. I mean, we don't have a lot. I mean, I'd say that the level of hostility that ours might face would be more secularism hostility than.
So how did you go about getting these missionaries? How did it work? What was...
Yeah, and so what we try to do is we try to not just go hunt for missionary, but when somebody within our church feels that this is what they ought to do, that we would walk with them. And so we've had some that were more short term. One went with Wycliffe, and really, honestly, this is pretty recent, but their mission was to serve other missionaries' kids. So that was, but they went, with Wycliffe
right.
into South America. for a period of time. Another long-term one that we have is with supported by our church, but with an organization, and there's a strategy and everything. But by and large, we only have a couple, and then the other two that we support are in the States.
So like church planting missionaries?
No, one is college and one is Child Evangelism Fellowship.
Okay, so
but these are
other churches or other.
Yeah, and so these are both just folks who, from within our church. We're kind of affirming the ministry that they have,
right,
by supporting it. And so that's I think anybody with a goal to see the kingdom grow is a mission. We've talked about in terms of the reason the church is called Mission Church. And I'm using the term missionary for people who are like kind of given some monetary support.
Right.
But we've said, you all are like, if your goal is to see the kingdom grow and for people to know Jesus, and if you believe that Jesus is the key to knowing God and being reconciled to the Father, and that's your mission at Burger King, you're a missionary.
Right.
Because you're getting to know people and being honest about your faith with them and willing to engage and learning the language and learning the customs, which is what you do everywhere.
Right.
To different degrees.
Right.
Which is frankly what everybody in the world is doing for their particular cause. They're learning the language, promoting it.
Right.
So the LGBTQ agenda, secularism, you're missionaries. Your goal is for people to see the good in this and that this is better, to learn how they think and speak and communicate it in those ways to them and be convincing and for the good of
and consolidating your base.
Yeah.
Too. And so they're all on mission.
Yeah. Right. So I think I want people to see that we're all doing it. We're living for what we believe in. Right. Every one of us in the world.
Yes.
And so you can just throw stones at people, but don't you see you do it? You're a missionary. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, missionary, the concept of being a missionary and all that has changed in the church because I've grown up in the church since the 70s. Yeah. And, and just to be a little controversial, my mentor who early on, he used to tell me, missionaries are people who can't hack mission in the States.
Yeah.
And that was an exaggeration and some hyperbole to it, but it was true in the 80s and 90s and 70s.
And still today, I've observed people wanting to get out of America.
Right.
And they use, that's a big problem.
Yeah. And and not able to actually express the gospel in really holistic and, culturally relevant ways, and so they move to another space that's easier for them or fits them better.
A lot of times in those cases, frankly, the gospel doesn't get. There's just a space in which this person can live and not have that struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to throw all missionaries under the bus because I don't think that's. But it is a trend that I experienced growing up in the church.
I've seen it. It's a problem.
It is a problem.
Yep.
It's interesting. So. Do you guys, do the missionaries that you have come through and talk about what they're doing, and you guys have communication and connection with them,
and our hope is to, as we get better at this, to have a very deep relationship with a few
missionaries, people
who've come from our community.
Right. Yeah. We have one missionary. And we put a huge chunk of our support towards that missionary. Yeah. I would say that, all of, probably 8% of our church income goes to that missionary. And
I love that.
But what I've found is that me personally, and I think a church that's on mission often has a hard time being in connection with its missionaries because it seems a little by itself consumed with its own mission.
Sure.
You know, and I do think social media has been very handy, except that our missionary really can't do much publicly because they're in places where the gospel is not.
As is the case for one of ours.
Yeah, so you have to be very careful about what you say and how you communicate and all that kind of stuff. But we've done it okay. Like when the missionary comes, we do a really good job. Like, and an experience that I've never had in church, in that our missionaries in a lot of homes and really kind of rooted into whatever the village is doing. But when they go, it's really difficult for all of us to stay really that connected. We try to remind our community, people on a newsletter. But they came out. One of them came out of our church. She married the other one, so they have adopted our church and his church and that kind of thing. But it's weird, kind of being in a place where I was always observing the process of, the churches I grew up in had the mission board, and it was sort of mysterious. I didn't know what the mission board did.
Well, and there seemed to be this goal in older churches that I observed, that they wanted there would be the map of the world, and the goal was to try to send somebody to like kind of every little sort of somewhere, spread them across the map.
And you would have the pictures all over the place.
And so if somebody sent you a letter and they were in South America and you didn't have one in South America, you might just go ahead and give something to that.
Right.
And we've kind of said, no, it needs to be, the connection needs to be like a meaning, like a, this is your community, or at least we're very, like, we're one of your like one of your two, churches that raised you or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So I worked at a church before this called an Evangelical Presbyterian Church, and when I was there, we had two budgets.
Yeah.
One budget was a church budget, and one budget was a mission budget. And people would pay, give their tithe to either. The mission budget, when we closed down, had $100,000 in it. We're talking about a church smaller than yours and mine.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's a pretty powerful mission board in itself.
Right.
A bank account that big, but people kept giving to it, and it just didn't know what to do with it all.
Wow.
Because the church wasn't doing well, but that's a lot of money.
Right.
Designated for foreign missions, but
yeah.
I don't know. Missions are interesting. So I don't know if you have anything else to say about this.
I could probably yak on and on, but I assume we've probably had a solid podcast.
We've gone 36 minutes.
Okay.
Interesting. And at least we've informed people about something they probably didn't really know that much about unless they were following it.
I assume some did, some didn't, right?
Yeah.
Like, it depends on your circles. But but I'd be interested. I'm interested in follow-up conversation on this, like even just inviting people from our churches or anything. I'm sure, there's other circles where you can have that. I'd rather have personal conversation, frankly,
right.
In light of what we just said about social media. So save your comments on Facebook. I know you're commenting on our posts like crazy.
All the time.
But actually, I'm grateful for that. Never comment on our posts. Just give us a call. Email faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com. We'll call you and get coffee. How's that?
And we might put you on the podcast.
And then we could put you on the podcast. Because, frankly, a lot of the chatter online is pretty unhelpful.
It is. I just try not to pay attention to it anyway.
Yeah.
I think what we could say, just to sum things up, is the basic conclusion, at least I hear from you, is that that you respect him for his willingness to die for what he believed in.
Right.
But that probably if a process, you were to do something like this, but you wouldn't be against it, would need to be something well thought out and with an organization and with wise people who were both guiding you and praying over you and thinking the process through.
I would have right. I'm not. Those would be exactly right. And then my response to all the critique is, people don't realize that they're doing the same things for different causes.
Right.
And that's, I think that's a blind spot in our culture. We don't realize that we're missionaries.
And it seems that the reaction indicates that we aren't as pluralist as we think. Like, we're not willing to have everybody's story be present.
Right.
There is the dominant story that's trying to take power.
Yeah, and interestingly, that dominant story that's trying to take power is calling Christianity the dominant story that's trying to take power.
Right.
And so it's a power struggle, is what it is.
It is.
And the power struggle is, and I mean, I acknowledge that Christianity was the dominant thing for a time in Western culture, of course. So I get that. But the hard thing is, like, Christianity used to be the nobodies that were trying to be, burned up and killed and just gotten rid of. And so for all the folks who feel like, my group is that, what are you going to do when you have the power now?
Right.
How are you going to steward it?
Yeah. That's a good question. We should end the podcast on that.
Should we? Okay, I'm down.